Hi, it's Travis here from Teleport. Today I'm going to show you how to connect to Microsoft SQL Server remotely from Teleport. We'll be utilizing Active Directory for authentication, so there are a number of components that need to be in place, many of which you may have deployed already. So before we even get to the Teleport part of the video, we'll need an Active Directory, we'll need a Windows EC2 instance to manage the users and groups, and a few other things. Again, in your environment, you may have these deployed already. If not, no worries. I'll walk you through all of it. And there will be timestamps below if you want to skip ahead. So let's get started today with an architectural diagram of what we'll be putting together. So let's take this resource by resource. So first, we have our AWS Managed Active Directory. Now, AWS makes this super simple to set up, as you'll see in a minute. Second, we have an Amazon RDS SQL Server that's domain joined. So this is their database. Third, we have a Windows EC2 instance for AD Directory Service, also, of course, domain joined. This will allow us to manage our Active Directory, or in our case, add users. So these three components here are prerequisites before we even get to the Teleport demonstration. If you have one or more of these in place and want to skip ahead again, check below. There will be timestamps to do so. So once those are out of the way, we'll go ahead and set up the Teleport database service, which is going to be on a Linux EC2 instance that's also domain joined. Now, the Teleport database service connects to the databases. It performs authorization, authentication, and establishes a reverse tunnel, see the arrow here, a reverse tunnel to the proxy. And this is important because users do not need direct access to the database service or the databases. You could even set up a firewall in front of this DB service because it only needs an outbound rule back to the proxy, no ingress at all. And finally, you need a Teleport cluster. Now, the Teleport cluster is made up of the Teleport proxy and the Teleport auth service. So the proxy serves as an authentication gateway. It serves a web UI, which we're going to use in a minute. And it accepts, in our scenario, database connections. This is the only public-facing component in one that all of your clients will connect to. You see the DB user is connecting to the proxy, not the database service or any of these other services that are behind a VPN. And finally, the Teleport auth service is the cluster's certificate authority that issues short-lived client certificates. So this is what we're going to be building today, and it's going to be a lot of fun putting it all together. So let's get started. So according to our diagram, the first thing we want to set up is the AWS Managed AD service. So just go up here to the search bar and type in directory service. And once that opens, you'll want to choose setup directory. And then AWS Managed Microsoft AD. Now I'm going to choose the standard edition. You will need a fully qualified domain name for your directory DNS name. I have one set up at teleport.town. For your NetBIOS name, this is optional. I'm going to leave it blank, but if you wanted to put test or something, it would be test.teleport.town. Test would be your NetBIOS name. If you leave this blank, then it's going to be the first part of your DNS name, so it'll be Teleport. So I'm going to leave this blank, and when I get into AD, I'm going to see I have a folder called Teleport. But just know that if you put a NetBIOS name here, that will be what your folder in AD is called. Let's leave the description blank and put in an admin password. So I'm going to paste in a password for that, and I'll confirm it and click Next. And finally, they ask you for a VPC and 2 subnets. So I'm going to choose my default VPC, and it has 2 subnets. So I'm going to choose those 2 and click Next. And that's it, create directory. Now you'll see up here it says this can take up to 20 to 45 minutes, and this will need to be ready before you can set up your RDS instance or anything else that needs to be domain joined. So take a break, go get some coffee, and come back when this is ready. All right, next we need to set up our Amazon RDS SQL Server, and we'll need to domain join it. So I'll just come up here and type in RDS and open up the Managed Relational Database Service. And I'll click on Create Database. And I'm going to do a standard create. I'm going to choose Microsoft SQL Server, Amazon RDS, and SQL Server Express Edition is fine. I'm going to call this mssql-db. I'm going to leave admin and type in a master password for my database. So I'm going to paste that in and confirm it. I'm going to leave the T3 because this is just a test database. I'll leave the storage. Storage auto-scaling I'll cut off. For my VPC, it's already in the default VPC. Make sure this is in the same VPC as your AD. Also your Windows EC2 instance when we create that next. Public access, no, because I'm going to access everything through the Teleport proxy. My VPC security group, I already have one. You can create one if you need to. I have one called RDS mssql. And then the key piece to this is the Microsoft SQL Server Windows authentication. So be sure you enable this to domain join it and then choose your directory, which mine is here. I'm going to cut off performance insights and things like that just to cut the cost a bit. Automated backups. And once that's done, so the main thing here is to enable the Windows authentication. So I'm going to click Create Database. And this will take a couple minutes as well, but we can move on. So the third piece here is going to be our Windows EC2 instance that's, of course, domain joined so that we can manage our Active Directory users. So I'm going to come up here and type in EC2 and launch instance. So I'm going to give this a name. I'll just put Teleport RBAC Win. And I'll choose Windows here, which is going to be a Microsoft Windows Server 2019 base. The instance type, I'm going to want to bump it up a little bit to an M3 because a T2 is, or T3 is just too small for a Windows instance. Key pair, I have a key pair, feel free to make a new one. Network settings, I need to make sure, again, I'm in the right VPC and have the right subnet. Auto assign a public IP, I'm going to choose enable because I want to RDP into this. And I'm going to select an existing security group, which I already have set up. Teleport TR-SG. And then if you scroll down, you'll get to this advanced details section. Make sure you expand that and choose your Active Directory. So where it says domain join directory, choose your Active Directory. And then you'll need an IAM instance profile that has this Amazon SSM Managed Instance Core and Amazon SSM Directory Service Access policies attached to it. So I have one set up already. Mine's called EC2 Domain Join. But if I click this and create a new profile and choose Create Role, AWS Service and EC2. And then right here, you just want to attach those two policies and save it. And that'll be your role. And so I have this Windows instance. I have it domain joined with the right IAM profile. And I think I'm good. I don't need anything else. Now click Launch Instance. So those are my prerequisite components, okay? I have my Active Directory, my SQL Server instance, and my Windows EC2 instance. Now that these are set up, we need to do some configuration before we move on to the teleport part of the video. So the first thing we're going to configure is the Windows EC2 instance. And we want to log onto that instance. We want to install the AD tools so that we can open up Active Directory. And we want to add a new user that we're going to use for our demonstration. Now we want to make sure we log onto this instance as our AD admin, not the account that comes with the key that we used when we created the instance, but we actually want to use our AD admin account. So when you created your managed Active Directory, you used a username of admin and you put in a password. We want to use that so that we can access our Active Directory as an admin. So let's try that out. I'm going to open up a RDP client, click Add PC. Let me get the public address for this and check your security group to make sure you can RDP into this instance. So I'm going to put in the IP address. For user account, ask when required is fine. Double click this. For my username, it's admin. For my password, I'm going to paste that in. So continue, and it should log me in as my AD admin. And it might take a second to set up. Now, if you try to log into this using that account and it doesn't work, give it like 5 minutes. When you create this instance and you join it to your domain, it can take 5-10 minutes for that to go into effect. So I had to try it several times before it worked as well. So once it's up and running, we want to open our Server Manager. So I'm going to go to the Start menu, type in Server Manager. I think this is outside of the window that you see, but just go to your Start menu and type in Server Manager, one word. And then you want to click Add Roles and Features. And it may not let you do this yet. Yes, Server Manager is collecting inventory data. The wizard will be available after data collection finishes. Usually takes like 30 seconds. So give it 30 seconds and try it again. All right, let's try it again. Add roles and features. And choose installation type. Choose next. Next again. And next again. And under features, you want to scroll down until you see Remote Server Administration Tools. Expand that and choose the Role Administration Tools box, checkbox, and that includes the AD stuff that we need. So just check that box and choose Next, and then Install to install these tools. And once that finishes installing, you can close it. You can actually close out your Server Manager. Now go to your Start menu and find this Active Directory Users and Computers. Click on that and open up your Active Directory. Mine, of course, is teleport.town. And remember, I didn't put in a NetBIOS name. I left it blank, which means it's going to take the first part of my URL, which is teleport. So I want to find that folder. Here it is, teleport. Open it up, right-click on Users, and go to New, and then User. And let's add a new user. We're going to call her Alice. And last name can just be like Doe or something. And then for user logon name, I'm just going to put Alice lowercase. And click Next. And I'm going to give her a password. And once you enter your password, uncheck the box where they have to change their password at next login. Click Next and finish. And all we did here was we just added a new user named Alice Doe that we'll use for our demonstration. And with that, you can quit the remote desktop. All right, so we got our prerequisites out the way. We have our Active Directory, we have our Windows instance for managing Active Directory, and we have our SQL Server set up. So we're done with their prerequisites. Now we can move on with setting up Teleport. So the first thing we want to do is to set up an Amazon Linux EC2 instance, domain joined, and then put our database service on it. So let's do that. So I'm going to launch a new instance. I'm going to give this instance a name. And I'm going to choose Amazon Linux as my AMI. And I'll keep a T2 micro, choose a key pair. Make sure my network is set to the same VPC that I've been using. Auto assign a public IP, I'm going to say enable, just so I can SSH into this. You could enroll this into Teleport and use it that way, but I'm just going to do this for demonstration's sake. Select an existing security group. I'm going to select the one I've been using, Teleport TRSG. And most importantly, go to Advanced Details and domain join your Amazon Linux EC2 instance. So I'm going to select my Active Directory and choose my instance profile that has these two policies in it. And I think that's it. There's nothing else. And just choose Launch Instance. So we're going to be installing our Teleport database service on this EC2 instance. And since this database service is going to be talking to our database and authenticating through AD, there are a few extra things we need to set up. First, Teleport requires a key tab file to obtain Kerberos service tickets from your Active Directory for authentication with SQL Server. This involves joining the Linux node to the Kerberos realm, and it involves creating a key tab file. Instructions for this can be found on the Go Teleport website. So if you go to goteleport.com, go to the docs and the database access section under guides, you'll see an article called Database Access with Microsoft SQL Server with Active Directory Authentication. So we need to join the realm and we need to create this key tab file. So if you go down to step 3, you'll have everything you need to get that done. So first, you need to install the necessary packages. I'm going to choose rel here. Copy this, and first I need to EC2 into my instance. So let me refresh. Choose my public IP address, and let's SSH into this instance. And now I can run these commands. So let's install the packages first. clear this. And all we're doing here is just doing a package update before we install these packages. Next, we need to edit this krb5.conf file and disable the reverse DNS resolution, and we need to set the realm. And all of it's documented here. So if I do a sudo vi etc krb5.conf, and just for simplicity's sake, I don't need all of this in here, so I'm actually going to delete some of this to get it out of the way. And for my default realm, I want to put my AD DNS. So that for me, that's going to be teleport.town. And it needs to be in all caps. This is important as it doesn't seem to work without it. Now under realms, we want to change these as well. So everything that says example.com, I'm going to change for me to teleport.town. And I need to uncomment these. I'm going to save that. And after we enter that, we can go ahead and join the realm. To do that, I'll follow the article here. So sudo realm join -v-u admin at, and this is all caps, teleport.town, teleport.town lowercase. So this is going to join the realm. And it's going to ask me for my password, my admin AD password. I'm going to paste that in. And there we go, successfully enrolled machine in realm. And if you want to double check it, just type in sudo realm list. There you go, type Kerberos, realm name, teleport.town, and all looks good there. So let's move on next to creating the key tab file. So Teleport requires a key tab file to obtain Kerberos service tickets from your Active Directory for authentication with SQL Server. Easiest way to do that on Linux is with the AD util package. So let's install that. Great, so we installed AD util. Now log into the Active Directory using the kinit command. Kinit admin at teleport.town. Again, I'll have to enter my password. And finally, we can create key tab entries for each Active Directory user that will be connecting to the SQL Server database. If you recall, we created an AD user called Alice. So let's create the key tab entry, AD util key tab create teleport.keytab. And we're creating this for Alice. Remember, in our AD, we created a user named Alice. This is for her. And so when I hit enter, it's going to ask me to select an encryption type. I'm just going to choose the first one on the list. And then it's going to ask me for Alice's password. I'll enter that and confirm it. And there we go. So a key tab entry has been created for Alice. And if you want to double check this, you can do klist-ke teleport.keytab. Hit return, and you'll see right here, the principal is in the key tab file. Alice at teleport.town, here's the encryption type. So again, this key tab file allows Teleport to obtain Kerberos service tickets from my Active Directory for authentication with SQL Server. And in our case, it's going to be for the user Alice. If we have more users, we just need to come here and add them to our key tab file. So now that we've joined the realm and created the key tab file, let's go ahead and set up the Teleport database service. And to set up the Teleport database service, we need to run this command, tcuttle tokens add, and this is going to generate a token for us. Now tcuttle is Teleport's administrative CLI, and we can use this to generate a new token. So we'll get a token here, then we need to install Teleport on the server, and then run this command, teleport dbstart, with a handful of parameters. So that's one way you can do it. What we're going to do in this tutorial is we're actually going to go to the UI, the Teleport cluster UI. Now you might be wondering, well, where did this come from? Well, if you look back at our diagram, at number 5 here, we have our Teleport cluster. Now I'm not going to go over in this tutorial how to set up a Teleport cluster because we have lots of videos on that and we have some good documentation. It's very simple to do. And actually, if you go to goteleport.com/docs and then go down to deploy a cluster, you'll get to this walkthrough. And essentially, to deploy a cluster, you need a domain name, number one. Then you need to install Teleport on your server. And finally, you need to configure it. So you'll need to enter in your domain, your email, and then run this Teleport configure command. So you'll have a domain name, you'll install Teleport, and you'll configure it. Once that's done, you'll start the service, and you can actually access the web UI, as seen here in the tutorial. So let's go back to the web UI. And it's actually this simple. So go to Databases on the left, click Add Database, and you can actually select your database from this dropdown. So we have the RDS SQL Server. If you have a self-hosted database, or another database on this list, just choose it. So I'm going to choose RDS SQL Server, and it will provide a teleport dbstart command with the parameters that we need to run on our server. So I'm going to copy this, and we need to change a few parameters. So I'm going to open up an empty text file in VS Code and paste in this command. And we'll need to change a few parameters. Let me cut on word wrap. Okay, so Teleport DB start. First, we have our token. Next, we have our auth server. That's correct. Next, name. So we're going to change this to, let's just call it SQL Server. This is what it's going to be called in our web UI. Protocol is SQL Server. The URI is actually going to be the URI of the RDS instance. So if I go to my RDS instance and just copy the endpoint, I'm going to paste that in as the parameter. And on the end of that, I'm going to add a :1433 for the port. Now the AD key tab file, what is my path to the key tab file? And if you remember in the last step where we created this key tab file, it's actually just in my home directory, and we're going to be running this command there. So I can just put teleport.keytab for that. So there is no path. I'm going to be directly in that path. For the AD domain, I'm just going to put my AD domain, which is teleport.town. Make sure you do that in caps. And finally, the AD service principal. And that's actually going to be the first part of your RDS endpoint URI. So it's going to be, for me, MySQL-DB. So put that here. Dot my AD domain. So teleport.town, :1433. And finally, my AWS region is US West 2. And that's it. Now, if you had trouble finding these for some reason, the documentation gives you some hints down here. So the AD key tab file, AD domain, and AD service principal, it kind of tells you where to look for those at, if for some reason yours are different. But I think what I provided is sufficient. Now, before we run this, we actually have to install Teleport on the server. So let's go back to our documentation here, and let's find Amazon Linux 2, which is what our EC2 instance is. So I'm just going to copy this whole thing, and we're going to run it on our server to install Teleport. All right, so now we can run our command. Let me open back up VS Code. And there's actually one more parameter that I'd like to add on here. If we go back to my article, and this teleport db start command, there's a labels parameter. I'm going to copy that and use that. And I'm going to add that right at the end of this. And instead of dev, I'm going to put prod. Let's assume that this is a production database. So we can copy this and paste it into our terminal. And we have to do this with sudo, so we need the full path to teleport. If you don't know what that is, again, just which teleport. And there's your full path. So I'm going to paste in this command, jump back to the beginning, and do sudo user localbin /teleport. And as soon as I run this, our SQL Server should show up in our web UI. So hit enter. And based on the logs here, we successfully registered the instance client. Database service has successfully started, and we should now see the database in Teleport. So let me close this and refresh. And there it is. Our SQL Server is now showing up in our Teleport cluster. Great job. So to connect to this database, just click the connect button, and there's a couple of commands we need to run to connect to the database. But before we do this, there are two things SQL Server specific that we need to do. So looking at our article, if you scroll down, you'll see them mentioned here. So number 6, we have to create a login for Alice. Remember, we created an AD user called Alice. Now with SQL Server, we have to create a login for her so that she can log into the server. And second, we need to install the mssql-cli. So you'll see right here, the mssql command line client should be available in the path of the machine you're running tsh dbconnect from. So let's install this mssql-cli first. So if you just go to Google and just type in mssql-cli and click the Microsoft documentation, and then I'll just go to Linux installation and click the installation guide. And what I'm going to do, I'm on the Amazon Linux 2 server, so I'm just going to choose one of these RPMs, like the Red Hat Enterprise RPM, right click, do copy link address, and I'm just going to run curl, paste that link, -o, and I'm going to save it as this file name here. So output to this file. Then I could just do a sudo yum install -y and then the file name, and that will install the mssql-cli. Great. Now the reason we need this is that's how Teleport connects to the Microsoft SQL database. It starts up a CLI so that you can interact with the database, run commands, or whatever you need to do. You'll see that in just a second. So we've installed the CLI. Let's go ahead and create a login for Alice. And we can do that by logging into our AD admin via mssql-cli. So you can run mssql-cli-s, and we need to enter the RDS endpoint. So I'm going to highlight this, copy, and paste that here. Oh, and it ran. Let me stop that and try it again. All right. So mssql-cli-s, the RDS endpoint, and then -U and admin. And it's going to prompt me for my password. So I'm going to paste that in. Again, this is your Active Directory admin account and password. And something happened. Let me try that again. I think I copied it wrong. All right, so now you see we have a prompt. We're in the Microsoft SQL Server connected to the master database. So I'm going to copy this command, this create login command for Alice, and paste this in. And I'm going to change this example /Alice to teleport /Alice. And I'm just going to leave the default database as master and hit enter. And it tells me that the server principal teleport /Alice already exists. That's because I think I did this before as I was setting up for this video. But you should see that this ran successfully. So it should say, successful or whatever. And that creates your login for Alice. So now that Alice can log into the SQL Server and we have the MySQL-CLI set up, we should be good to log in from Teleport. So let's head back to the web UI, click on Connect for that database, and there's 3 steps. Step 1, you need to log into Teleport, which is standard. Wherever you're at, you need to log into the Teleport cluster. So I'm going to copy this command and paste it here. And I'm actually going to log in as Alice. So I've created a user in Teleport named Alice, and I'm going to use that. So TSH login, and you put your proxy. Auth is going to be local, and user Alice. Hit enter, and then I got to provide my password and my second factor. And now I have a certificate valid for 12 hours. Second, retrieve credentials for the database. So this is TSH DB login. And before we do that, let's just do a TSH DB ls to list our databases that we have access to. And there's our SQL Server database. So let's copy this command to retrieve the credentials from the database. And I'm actually going to remove the DB name and just use the DB user flag. DB user equals Alice, because that's the database user I want to log in as. Hit return, and it's just as simple as running TSH DB connect and then the database name, SQL Server. Hit enter, and we should be able to connect. But there's an error message. Access to DB denied. Why is this? Well, with SQL Server, we've created a login for Alice, And if you want to create access to databases, you still need to do that in SQL Server. Remember, Teleport is there for access. So you can have all your databases listed here, you can access them all, but you still need to create the login and the access on SQL Server for Alice, which we did. We created a login for Alice. However, we need to make sure in Teleport that she has the correct role to access this database. So even though access has been set up rightly in SQL Server, with Teleport you have a complete RBAC system to control who has access to what. So if we take a look at Alice here under our users, you'll see that Alice has the role developers-prod. So if we go to roles and look at what that gives her access to, and under DB users you'll see this templating, and we have a nice article in our docs about templating and how that helps to scale better, but for demonstration purposes, we're just going to grant this role access to the Alice user. So anybody with this role should be able to access the Alice user. So if I click Save Changes and try it again, I should now have success. And there we go. We've now logged into the database via Alice. And now we can run a command on the master database like getting all of the server principals. And there we go, and we see teleport/Alice. Now let's say we go back to the Alice user, and instead of developer prod, let's make her role developer dev. Like we don't want her accessing the production environment. And this role is the same as developer prod, there's the Alice user, but instead of the environment prod DB label, it's only allowed to access the environment dev DB labels, or databases with that label. So if I go back to my database, you see that it has a prod label. But now that we've changed her role, she should no longer be able to access this database. So let's log out just to get a fresh certificate here and log back in as Alice. And now if I try to even list my databases, tshDBls, I won't even see them because I don't have a role that allows me to access that database. So you see here the power of RBAC within Teleport. You can have databases on all the clouds, on-prem, wherever, all listed here, and you can use the built-in RBAC utility to control who has access to what. And so now you can go to SQL Server, you can grant access to Alice or Bob or whoever to certain databases, and then come back to Teleport and control that RBAC for all of your users. Very powerful. Now let's say you don't want to use the MySQL CLI, and instead you want to use some kind of graphical user interface like Azure Data Studio, Datagrip, or something like that. Well, now that we've made the connection, we can do that via a local database proxy. So if you, again, head to our documentation and go to Connect Your Client in Database GUI Clients, you'll get instruction on how to do this. So right here it says, starting the local database proxy with the tunnel flag will create an authenticated tunnel that you can use to connect to your database instances. You won't need to configure any credentials when connecting to this tunnel. So it's using the same secure authentication, but we're creating a local proxy so that we can connect with our graphical user interfaces. And in this article here, it gives you a number of examples. Here's pgadmin, dbeaver, MySQL Workbench, and on and on. We're going to use Azure Data Studio, and I'm going to show you how this works. And this can be done wherever you can connect to the Teleport cluster. So I'm going to do it from my local terminal here on my computer. So let me disconnect from my EC2 instance. And the first thing I need to do, of course, is to log into the Teleport cluster. So tsh login. And I'm going to be using my user Alice. So enter the password, enter my second factor. And now that I'm authenticated, let me log into the database. And I can start the proxy with this command over here. So tsh proxy db. And you see down here, it gives you a port 62652. You can actually set that with the P flag. I'm going to set it to 1433 just for clarity. And then the tunnel flag and the name of our server, SQL Server. And I'm actually going to go back and add another flag here so we can get more information on what's happening. And this will start the proxy. So let's hit return. And we'll see what's happening. So let's scroll up and we'll see there's some certificate interaction. There's a connection to our Teleport cluster, checking the key, successful authentication with the proxy, and finally, started authenticated tunnel for the SQL Server database, SQL Server in cluster, and there's our cluster on localhost port 1433. So now that we have this secure local proxy, we can open up a graphical user interface like Azure Data Studio, and connect to our database. So let's start a new connection. And for server, I'm going to put localhost, 1433, because that's my port. If you didn't change that, it'll be the 65, whatever that number was. My username, I'm going to use Alice, and I don't need to supply a password. So let me hit connect. And there we go. We have a connection to our database via Azure Data Studio. And again, if I want to go to databases and my master database and check out my server principals, I can run a new query. Paste it here, click run. And I can interact with my database via a graphical UI. And the last thing I want to look at is Teleport's Audit Log. The Audit Log gives us information like who logged in, at what time, what SQL commands are being ran, things like that. So in the Teleport Web UI, if you go to Activity and Audit Log, you'll see that everything we've been doing has been captured here in the Audit Log. And here you'll see all of the interactions Alice has had with the database. You'll see queries that she's made. You'll see session starts and session ends with timestamps and details to match. In fact, Teleport logs SSH, Kubernetes desktop, and database events into its audit logs. So it has built in a way to track events for each user, and also SSH desktop and Kubernetes shell sessions are recorded, and you can actually play those back later. And you'll find that under session recordings. So with all of that, this concludes our Microsoft SQL Teleport demonstration. I hope it was helpful. And if you have any further questions or get stuck along the way, be sure to check out our community Slack. The link is right here in front of you. We'd love to see you there. Thanks for watching, and thanks for taking the time to check out Teleport.